Sounds good.
Welcome to today's Hinckley Forum. My name is Casey Hansen, and I'll be the forum host for today's conversation. The Hinckley Institute of Politics is a nonpartisan institute at the University of Utah. The Hinckley provides an array of transformative experiences for students through internships, forums, and classes. Hinckley forums seek to foster public discourse and civil debate on the most current and pressing issues, bringing in local, national, and international thought leaders. This forum is titled Politics of the Mexican Border and is presented as part of the University of Utah's International Education. We want to thank the Center for Latin American Studies for their partnership on this event. I'll now turn it over to Professor Claudio Holzner.
Talking to the microphone? Yeah. Thank you all for coming. This is a great turnout. I'm excited to see you all and excited to hear more about this very complicated issue of politics of the U.S.-Mexico border. Before I introduce our guest speaker today, I just want to highlight again that this is part of a series of events that are part of International Week at the U. If you go online, there's really like dozens and dozens of really cool events on campus that you might be interested in. I also want to highlight the participation on this event of the Center for Latin American Studies on campus. They're co-sponsoring this event, and they also put on a lot of really great programming on campus and are a source for scholarships for students and for putting on great events like this. It's a Title VI National Resource Center, which serves as a hub for all Latin American related activities at the University of Utah, which involves teaching activities, research activities, and community outreach activities as well. The Center for Latin American Studies provides faculty with the resources and the intellectual environment to realize cutting-edge research and works with campus and community partners to develop exceptional educational opportunities, courses, public events, study abroad programs, and internship programs for students. And I think this is evidence of how of these sort of exceptional educational opportunities that the Center for Latin American Studies in partnership with the Hinckley is providing all of you. Next, I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Pedro Rojas. I'm really, really delighted to have him on campus. He is the White House correspondent for Univision. If you don't know, Univision is the largest and arguably the most important Spanish language network and certainly the most important news network in the United States, has enormous reach, and he's the White House correspondent for Univision. He has a lengthy history, over 10 years, covering firsthand politics at the border between the U.S. and Mexico. He was a correspondent first in Houston, Texas, and then in McAllen, Texas, covering the entire southwest border. So he brings a really unique firsthand perspective of the dynamics of border politics and what happens on the ground, right, when you try to implement border policy, combined with this higher level perspective on the national politics, right, the White House politics, if you will, the Washington politics of the border. So I'm really looking forward to the talk. I think I'm going to learn a lot, and I want to thank you all for coming today. So please join me in welcoming Pedro Rojas to the University of Utah.
Thank you, Professor Holton. Can everybody hear me okay? Everybody hears me okay? Fine. Well, thank you. As an anecdote, years ago, I attended the University of Utah, the English Language Institute, in 2001. So it's good to be back here. It's good to be among you. And I'm so grateful for this invitation. Many years ago, I wasn't planning on living on the border, but I happened to be assigned to work and cover the US Mexico border with the emphasis in northern Mexico as well as South Texas and the entire southwest border. Years ago, as a result of that, I was able to live and bring my family along to McAllen, Texas. I don't know if you guys know much about South Texas, but it's one of the mid-sized cities in McAllen. It's a fairly thriving city these days. A lot of trade with Mexico going on. A lot of growth in college. The University of Texas Rio Grande Valley has launched a medical school, and the University of Texas A&M is also launching a campus on site. So a lot of research is going on because of the need and the growth of the population. There is about a million and a half residents in that metropolitan area now. So it's growing, and therefore there are many needs to cover. Having been there as a resident helped me understand a matter that sometimes from Washington, D.C., for folks like myself that work at the White House and as they call it, the Beltway bubble cannot really be easily understood. I'm going to start out by asking you, how many of you have a house or live in a house? You can raise your hand. We got a handful of people. How many of you have fencing around your house in the backyard? So we do have some folks that have fencing in their back. I have a house in Maryland, and I have fencing in my backyard and around because I got young kids, and I don't want dogs to come in and maybe poop in my backyard, which quite frequently the cats do. So I do have a fencing. How many of you have traveled to the border of Mexico by car? One, two. So we got a handful of people. You know what that experience is like? Coming into a new country, different language. People drive differently, streets are narrow, maybe not as well paved as the roads are here. People screaming in your ear, trying to sell you something, that sort of thing. That's what Mexico and its reality on the border. And the reason being is because it's becoming a bit of a sponge, a big magnet for migrants that have tried to come many times into the U.S. and have been returned and now live either selling or homeless or trying to make a living in any way possible they can in the northern Mexico cities. So that's reality for the border. And the reason I brought the analogy of the fencing is because this has been the argument. We're talking about 2,100 miles of border between the US and Mexico. The federal government, since the Clinton administration, has started building border fencing, and there is about, at that time when he left office, it was about 400. The Bush administration, Bush #2, built a little over 200 miles, and the Trump administration rebuilt or replaced, and that's the right word as they call it, about 400 miles of which was all fencing brought down from the Vietnam War and extended about 100 miles of fencing. So that gave us about 800 miles of fencing. So we have 1,200 miles of non-fenced border line between the two countries. Anybody that you will talk to from the Border Patrol will tell you that it is a security component that helps the Border Patrol agents narrow the migrant flows into more difficult locations. Therefore, it makes it a lot more difficult for migrants to come across and a lot easier for the agents to capture them. That's the entire reasoning behind all of that. So I'm giving you this idea because I'm gonna put you in the shoes of a resident of McAllen or Hidalgo or El Paso that is accustomed to have folks walking in their backyard at any given time, especially in the overnight hours, and sometimes knocking doors and asking for water or food. And I want you to put yourself in there, picture yourself in your house. Someone comes and knock on your door and knock on your window desperately because maybe there is a child that needs help. What would you do? What would be your answer? What will be your first reaction? I happen to interview many residents at the southwest border that basically will say, I have a hose connected to my faucet outside. And I just tell them, turn the water, drink from the hose. And many will say to you that they were fed up, that they are tired, that they want the government to act. These are the realities that they're affecting the residents in the southwest border. And this is why this has become a hotspot for topics and politics. Last week, the federal government was asked, or basically the White House asked the commissioner of the Customs and Border Protection, a guy by the name of Chris Magnus. Does anybody know who that figure is? He was a police chief in Tucson, police chief in San Francisco, was appointed by the president, President Biden, approved by the Senate, have been in office for a year. But because of the numbers of migrants crossing the border so high, and the largest number in history, 2.3 million in the fiscal year 2022, and the fact that the numbers are not going down between September and now, and October, over 400,000. So the numbers keep going up, and they are trending to get into the same levels as they did in the last year. The Secretary of Homeland Security asked Mr. Magnus to resign. Now, he refused. And for 3 days, he kept saying, I'm doing the police reforms that I was asked to within the Border Patrol and the Customs and Border Protection Agency. By Friday, he issued his resignation effective immediately. So this is where we are. As of last weekend, we are in the mix of a turmoil within the Homeland Security Department, which is the agency in charge of the Border Patrol, the Customs and Border Protection, and the Air and Marine Division that runs and secure the air and the water lines, the river and the Gulf of Mexico, and the coastal regions in San Diego for the Border Patrol. That's where we are. We're in the mix of a crisis. So this topic is ever important. And why is that? Because we just wrapped up midterm elections. You guys know more or less the outcome of it, right? Some of you have kept up with the news. We have an even Congress, or a bit of a split Congress. More than likely, the Senate will be controlled by the Democrats, and the House will be run by the Republicans with a really lean majority, which will make it really harder for the Republicans to negotiate. But that's how we're going to have a government for the next 2 years. Now, is that going to guarantee us all a change on policy at the border, a reduced amount of traffic flow, a change on policy for the U.S.-Mexico relations? We still don't know. What we know for sure is that the president met with President Lopez Obrador recently at the White House. And what was said in that meeting? There was a lengthy amount of requests made by the Mexican government. And there was a lengthy amount of requests made closed doors from Biden to AMLO. And in those conversations, there was an agreement put out that stated the following. It says that Mexico and the U.S. are going to invest about $4 billion in border security, mainly trade, new border crossings, new areas where buses and trucks can come with goods back and forth, and more security. And Mexico committed to secure the southern border a little more. And we're seeing some of the reflection of that. People is being held more in Chiapas and Oaxaca and the southern area of Mexico and Tapachula. But the influx are not stopping. So what's going on? What's happening? Is that working out for the U.S. government? Is that working out for Mexico and its interest? I think that we're still waiting to be seen the result of that meeting. But what we know for sure is that we have a border that is really porous. And if you talk to any Border Patrol agent, he's going to tell you, I'm fed up, I'm tired. My morale is down. I'm babysitting kids. I'm babysitting unaccompanied minors. I'm driving kids to the hospital. I'm driving women that are pregnant to have children in the hospital. In fact, 45% of the agents and the Border Patrol agents are now babysitting migrants in hospitals along the southwest border. That's where we stand. So I'm putting you all of this in context so that you kind of get an idea of what we're dealing with from the U.S. standpoint. Now, is there a humanitarian crisis? There is. What is the result of that? Why are we in the mix of this reality? The reality is that we have a lot of families that are coming with nothing. A lot of them are sick, and kids are dying on the woods of the border. Not only on the southern border. In fact, last night I saw pictures of 3 young kids, 4 or 5-year-olds, abandoned in the northern border with Canada. So this is on both sides. This is on both sides. I want you all to picture in your house with your fencing, quiet morning, sunny day, you had no one walking around you. That isn't the reality for the folks that live in the southwest border. Besides the fact they have police chases that are outnumbered any large city in America because migrants are being held in cars and driven by smugglers that are running away from police. So police chases are every single day in the little towns on the southwest border. So I'm telling you all of this so you guys get an idea of what we're dealing with, how the U.S. can change policy. I think there is really a time for both parties to get together and address it in some fashion. First and foremost, I think both parties owe Americans a change on immigration policy. The last time the immigration laws were reformed was in the 1980s when when the big immigration reform was made and about 3 million migrants were legalized in President Reagan's term. And that was the last time that immigration laws were ever touched. Therefore, the laws are totally outdated. And we all know it because this country has a huge demand for labor. And the labor is being supplied by the migrants, especially in the service industry, especially in the construction industry and the landscaping industry. How many of you have landscapers that cut your grass? Who are they? Who's the guy that serve you and clean your room in the hotels? I want you all to realize that there is a need for labor, and that need is being supplied by the migrants that are coming. And unfortunately, because of the current laws, they have a really hard way to get legal in the country. There's no way in how they can be done quickly. And therefore, the process, because the system has made it so much difficult, they choose for the easier one. The easy one is to pay a smuggler to funnel you into the US illegally. But the problem of that is that a lot of men and women are being raped and children and abused and used for human slavery. And as a result of that, unfortunately, a lot of people are dying on both sides of the border, not only in the US, but also on the Mexican side, because unfortunately, this scenario that we're in, because of the current laws in America, had allowed the criminal organized groups to develop their own way to handle folks as they come from anywhere in the world into the US. Anybody that crosses illegally between the ports of entry is being funneled through the organized criminal activity in Mexico. They decide how and when and where you're going to cross. That's how it goes. Humans are a commodity used for financial gain. And unfortunately, those that cannot afford are forced to hard labor or human slavery or sexual trafficking. And then when you talk to attorneys that provide pro bono services to unaccompanied minors, they'll tell you right off the bat that about 50, 60% of the kids that they're dealing with have been sexually abused in their journey to the border, more than once. So we have a society that is going to deal with years and years of emotional and physical issues. This is the picture of the US-Mexico border currently. It's not changing because, again, Congress is sitting on the fact that they're not addressing the laws. They could change and make things better. The Republicans will argue they won't touch immigration law until the border is totally secure. And the border won't be secure as it is today. We have over 20,000 Border Patrol agents on site. In Texas, you got over 2,500 National Guard and state troopers patrolling, and that isn't doing any difference. It's just the same. Migrants keep coming, people keep showing up and asking for asylum. So the other scenario is, are the Democrats willing to negotiate? Well, the fact is that we have now the split Congress. Republicans will run the House. Democrats will run again the Senate with a lean majority, as well as the Republicans in the House. Are they both willing to negotiate and come to an agreement? Is that something that we can all do? And while we're all sitting in these classroom settings and talking about how we can change the future and so forth, the truth is that tonight, more than maybe 2,000 people will be crossing the border illegally tonight. And maybe 3 or 4 of them will not make it. They will either die of heat, starvation, bit by a snake, or drown in the river. That's what will happen tonight. And none of us can change that reality. All we know is the facts. And one of my biggest frustrations over the years that I lived in the southwest border is that nothing was really changing. Even with the border wall being built, even with the more security on the ground, with the sensors, with the drones being put in, the thermostats, the 360-degree sensor heating cameras, none of that will stop people. When they are eager to get a better life, they're gonna go for it. A lot of my colleagues and I debated the fact of why I would do if I was living in any country where I know my future isn't possible. Do I engage in this journey? Would I put my family and kids in this journey? I don't know if I will do it. I don't know. I really don't know, because I am not in that scenario, so I cannot make an assessment like that. I don't have the means and ways to figure it out, what I will do. But I can tell you that many people is doing it today out of desperation. I didn't bring a number, a group that I mentioned yesterday. We have seen a lot of Brazilians too, Russians, Chinese, Serbian, Ukrainians. Venezuelans are the larger number lately, Cubans and Nicaraguans, of course, and we know that. We know the reason is because these 3 countries are under tough socialist regimes. They're violating civil rights left and right, and people is leaving, fleeing for a better life. We know that. But there is also a huge influx of Colombians lately, Peruvians, Ecuadorians. So the numbers are not only one country anymore. In fact, Mexicans and Central Americans, based on the last numbers, are now up to 30%. So the other 70% is people from other countries. No longer the Mexican nationals are the only ones crossing. That has changed dramatically. So where do we stand when it comes to the U.S.-Mexico relations in this picture? We have seen a couple of meetings, one face-to-face already between President Biden and President Obrador at the White House. We have seen also talks about President Biden heading to Mexico in the next few weeks, in the next few months. Possibly it will be announced in the next few weeks. We'll hear that from the White House. We'll see President Biden headed to Mexico, and now the election is in the past. We'll see what kind of agreement will be made, but we know that Secretary Blinken, the Secretary of State, has been in the White House, has been in Mexico many times lately. And so is Secretary Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary, trying to address these immigration flows. The Summit of the Americas that was held in LA earlier in May in this year, it was signed an agreement, but many countries signed on and agreed to try to support the migrants that were transiting in their countries and give them a free pass to either stay as a resident or benefits to remain and avoid the danger of the Darien jungle between Colombia and Panama, which is an area where unfortunately a lot of migrants are crossing through to make their journey up north, and unfortunately a lot of people have died. We don't have numbers on that. What we know is that a lot of people have died there or lost limbs and so forth. And just in the month of October, over 50,000 people crossed the Darien jungle between Panama and Colombia. That indicates that the numbers in November will not be any lower than what we saw in October. We can assess that easy. We know where we're headed. So is there a possibility that we can get a what we call a Western Hemisphere agreement, that we can address these issues from the root causes? That's the dream that we all have. Now, is there willingness from any of these governments to come together and say, okay, stop it. Let's just figure it out. People doesn't need to die this way anymore. No, not yet. We don't have that. So numbers. Let's talk a little bit about numbers, and I'm going to open up for you because I'm sure you guys have a lot of questions. In fiscal year 2023, 2.3 million migrants crossed the border, were apprehended by Border Patrol. So far in the last month, 2 months, about 400,000 plus have been apprehended. So you can add that number. And based on Border Patrol estimations, more than 800,000 have gotten away, meaning they were never apprehended and we don't know where they are in the US today. Those are the numbers. And that's the scenario that President Biden is looking at as he considers in the next month or so to run again for re-election. And that's going to be an Achilles tendon for him if he chooses to run again in 2024. Because we have Fox News, we have Newsmax, and we have other conservative media outlets telling us every single day with drone video and such, this is what the border looks like. So we see it. If you guys want to see it, turn on the Fox News at any afternoon, and you'll see a reporter right on the border with a drone video showing the groups lining up to get processed by the Border Patrol on site. So we have it. It's no longer a secret. And the question is, what is the federal government doing about it? So with that being said, I'm just going to open up for you guys. I know there's a lot of questions in the room, so I want to give you guys a chance to raise your questions. Go ahead.
What, if anything, do you think is the solution?
Congress. It comes down to Congress. I mean, Congress is the one body of government that needs to act. And I think all of us need to hold accountable Congress. They need to act urgently. Look, I save kids myself, and women. One time, I remember, I'm going to tell you a story. I got many stories in the border, but one time I was running and I was doing a ride along. And ride along is when a reporter gets to sit down with a Border Patrol agent and you ride down this path, which is usually a heavy traffic area, and see what you can find. And I found this woman with 2 kids. One was about 6, the other one was about 9. And the kid was really weak. I can see his face, his body is turning almost purple. And I'm looking at him and I go, what's going on? And she goes, my kid has kidney problems, but he has to take his pills. And she says, I don't have any water. And I run to the car. I kid you not, I run to the car and I didn't have a bottle of water with me. So I threw a fit to the agent. I said, we need water to this woman. I'm not moving out of here to this woman get water. And so this agent kindly called another one and showed up, and we gave him water. And then someone came and said, and then I said, she can be moved. This kid can walk more than, because the processing center was about 2.5 miles up the road, and a dirt road. It's about 110 degrees out there. You don't want to put a kid in that condition to walk any longer. That's it. So we asked for an AMT, which is the emergency services technician, to show up. And because I did it, then that agent got chewed out by a supervisor afterwards. Why did you bring an EMT here? This is too close to the border. You shouldn't do this and that. But I was proud and happy, and I was really pleased to go home knowing that I have done the difference, that I have served this kid life, because it was a moment. It was a moment. In the river, many times. The way the migrants are treated by smugglers when they are crossing the river is diminishing. It's really bad. They're used. They're insulted. They take pictures of them to report back to the chief that they pay as they were crossing. They insulted verbally. These migrants are subjected, and I don't mean to put them as victims, but they are subjected to a lot of verbal mistreatment. Okay? Any other questions?
Real quick for, oh, that's loud. Future questions, just raise your hand. I'll run the mic over. We have people online that would like to hear these.
So I think that I would agree that probably both sides of, people who are both crossing and people on the southern border, and also just kind of in politics, both people on the left and right kind of want to address this problem. But how do you kind of I guess, marry the two ideas where, well, maybe not, but you'll have a lot of people who want to make it easier to become a citizen in America or to cross the border, maybe to make it more applicable to refugees and kind of refugee status. Well, but then you also have a group of people that, is it still? Okay. A group of people that don't want immigration at, like, they think that immigrants will take away jobs, and just or that they bring crime, all these things. How do you kind of get Congress to work together to come up with solutions when there are these just kind of like opposing ideologies, kind of? Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to say that we all can held accountable as our elected officials. We all. 435 members of Congress, 100 members in the Senate. Each state gets 2 senators, and that's the more even chamber and the Senate. We all can make calls. I mean, it's a point in time where, again, tonight, I just want you guys to put yourself in the shoes of this reality. Tonight, over 2,000 people will cross illegally, and at least 4 to 5 will die tonight. And that's in every given day. Okay? There's a county named Brooks County in South Texas, north of McAllen, 90 miles north. And there's a sheriff there named Benny Martinez. If you ever talk to this guy, you're going to hear stories that are horrific. And his charge is to go find bodies in the desert and the ranch lands. Men and women, they attempted to cross and circumvent a border patrol checkpoint in ranch lands. Hundreds and hundreds of miles of ranch lands. And guess what? They get bit by snakes, they get injured, and the thorns of the plants. And they have maybe some precondition, diabetes of some sort, and they can continue walking, and they die. And Sheriff Benny Martinez will tell you right off the bat that for everybody found, 5 will never be found. This is the U.S., guys. This is the United States. For everybody found, 5 will never be found. Why? Because the land is sandy. The animals will eat you, and over time, you're going to be buried. So when you come to Sheriff Martinez's offices, one of the things that he does is he brings out a folder, a binder, with pictures of all the bodies found. And you can see the reality. In fact, it got so crazy that now he's got a mobile morgue sitting on the parking lot next to his county jail where he holds bodies that are not yet identified. That's part of the reality. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I apologize. I have 2 questions, and you can answer either one if it's too much. But one is if you could talk about the dynamic between increased border control and the business of coyotes and trafficking people across the border and how that dynamic works. And then the second is, I think it's hard to hear all of this and feel hopeless. And so from your perspective, where are the stories where people are making a difference and shifting the conversation, influencing politics, getting messages to Congress, or being able to, in fact, make a difference? Because I think that news plays an important role in informing us, but sometimes it can make us also feel helpless, like we don't have a role. And I think that other story is important.
And thank you for bringing those two. Well, border fencing, border security, there's a huge investment behind it. I mean, the U.S. has drones, has fencing, has sensors on the ground, meaning that when you set foot on U.S. soil, it immediately send a signal to someone on a camera sitting in a border patrol station that is looking at you and knows that you just came across. That all of that technology is in place. Okay. And again, Border Patrol agents will tell you border fencing is a security component, is not the final solution, because it funnels people to an area where I can capture them easier. Make sense? But facts are that the way it works is border smugglers will send hundreds and hundreds of unaccompanied minors and family units to be captured on a specific spot, and that will require dozens of agents that will have to come out to the field and process them on the field. And the way it's processed, that you have to separate every person, search him, make sure that you don't have any knives or weapons on you. And then after you do that, you pull out, you ask for documents and trying to define whether that person is who claiming who she is or who he is. And then after that, you take away their belt buckles don't go and belts don't go, because people tend to use those to harm themselves or harm others. Any type of shoelaces go away, and so is anything that women use to hold their hair up in the ponytail. All of that goes away, and then immediately you get loaded onto a bus. Guess what? That will take hours. That will take hours. And then you have 4 or 5 miles its way and 4 or 5 miles on the other way, empty. And that's how drugs are being smuggled. So I'm going to put it simply, we're looking at a cat and mouse game all the time. All the time. It's the way the smugglers run it, it's the way people do it, and it's the way, unfortunately, the sovereignty of the U.S. is being violated at any given day. Now, is there a way to come to an agreement? I believe there is. I mean, anybody in the border, and you will say it's eager to hear some sort of solution. Are we in it for a solution? Yes. And I think the residents of the large cities, New York, Philadelphia, Chicago, LA, Houston, Dallas, Phoenix, we're now newcomers, migrants are now mainstream U.S. citizens, have become naturalized citizens, need to get more active on this and demand that the elected officials really get their hand on this. I mean, why are you going to rather, if I could just request a loved one that lives overseas and do it the right way, but that takes me years to happen, and I'm choosing to do it the risky way by bringing them illegally, let's change the laws. Let's make this process easier, and so everybody can do it in the right way and not putting so many lives on the line, unfortunately. I mean, it is, I think that we all have a bit of accountability in a sense that we can start demanding our elected officials to act. Again, 435 members, Utah has the Utah delegation has 4 members of Congress, 2 senators. So you have someone that can say, you know what, I'm gonna get my hands around this. We can do something. These people is accountable to us. They're elected officials, we put them in there. I mean, we have to hold them accountable in some fashion, and they gotta say, you know what, I'm just gonna work on this. It doesn't matter which party you are, which political ideology you carry, but I think we can do, and recognizing the facts. The facts is the service industry, the construction industry, the landscaping industry, to name a few, and nowadays a lot of the home retiring industry is run mostly by migrants. Ladies and gentlemen, that's reality. I want you to go and look at him. Who's cutting your grass? Who's building your house? And then you're going to see what I'm talking about. And you can do it through a random question. Hey, how many kids you got? And they're going to tell you, yeah, I got 2 kids, but I'm still bringing 1 more. I don't want to leave my kids. They have the right to have a family, don't they? That's an aspiration that we all have. We want to be families together. So that's reality. That's where we are. And I believe that there is a way and how. I hope this Congress come together, and I hope the Republicans, they're meeting together trying to define who's going to be the leader. More than likely will be Kevin McCarthy. But if that is, I hope Kevin McCarthy really reasons with himself and figures something out that needs to be done quickly. Go ahead.
So let's say Congress passes legislation to create more immigrant jobs legally, and for the jobs that migrants typically do.
Yeah.
How do you suggest that Congress should deal with the slow and clogged legal immigration process?
Staffing. That's called staffing. You got to change staffing. And that's a great point you brought it up, because do you guys know how many immigration judges this country has? Not even 400. Not even 400. And that's run by the Department of Justice. Now, any expert will argue that to call a judge and to name and to designate a judge, it takes a while. You have to screen them. You have to prepare them. They have to be proven attorneys, so forth, so forth, so forth. But the truth of the matter is the docket of any immigration job is loaded today all the way to 2027. That judge doesn't have to move a finger. That docket is loaded. He knows it. And anybody that is seeking asylum knows that the first appointment will be maybe in 2025. That's the truth. And it's a really issue, a huge issue. Both Trump administration and Biden administration, Obama administration have spoken about bringing judges to the border. There is a Congressman, Vicente Gonzalez, out of South Texas, that have proposed, let's put a filter in southern Mexico. Let's process them in southern Mexico, and we know who can qualify, and we can fly them into the country. Of course, Mexico, that's Mexico's sovereignty, and I highly doubt Mexico is going to accept something like that. But they will say, well, the Mexico border is only 200 and something miles. It's not 2,000 miles. It's a little more manageable. But there's a lot of people that fly into Mexico and try to come across illegally too. So you can't really filter it out that way. There's a lot of proposals being thrown out there, but honestly, that's the Department of Justice, and they have a huge responsibility into this issue. The Biden administration proposed to bring more asylum officers, which is different than a border patrol agent. This is not an officer with a uniform, with a gun on the hip, none. It's just a civilian person that comes and listens to the case and determines whether it's something called probable cause. And if you guys know what that is basically the term used to determine whether that person really qualifies to be an asylum seeker in the U.S. And if that person says no, then that person can appeal. I only have 14 days to appeal, and if that appeal doesn't go through, then he's immediately removed. That is a process. But you need to have at least 20, maybe 15,000 asylum officers on site and any border patrol station to do this quickly. That hasn't happened. So staffing is a big issue. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Pedro. So I want to kind of piggyback on this question and your response. So one of the things I'm taking away from your talk is just how complicated and dynamic the situation is on the border, how complex the problems are, and how little we know about what's actually going, if we don't live on the border, what's going on there. So I'm surprised, for example, to learn how increased border security actually strengthens the cartels, right? And how they take advantage of, the border enforcement policies to smuggle drugs, right? So they sort of play the immigration stuff against their drug interests. Also, it's surprising to learn that most immigrants coming into the United States are not coming from Mexico and Central America, right? The majority are coming from Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba, and Russia, and Haiti, and all these other countries. I didn't necessarily know that. And then a third fact that I think you're alluding to here is that most people trying to cross the border may not be what we typically think of as undocumented immigrants trying to avoid apprehension. There's a very large percentage that are asylum seekers, that are actually trying to seek from entry illegal ways. And so they're looking for Border Patrol agents to get captured so that they can request asylum, which is clogging up the system. Can you tell us a little bit more about that dynamic?
Yes.
About why we have an increase in asylum seekers, what percentage of migrants are asylum seekers, and how that's changing the politics of immigration moving forward?
Since the Trump days, there was a filter put out where most of the ports of entry, so-called POEs, became a non-capable facility to handle large flows of migrants. And we have currently the The Title 42 policy in place is still with the Biden administration. The Title 42 policy, if you guys don't know what that is, it's a policy imposed by the CDC to prevent the further increments in numbers of COVID cases. So the argument is that anybody that is then to determined by Border Patrol agents a threat to the health of Americans can be immediately expelled back to Mexico. It doesn't matter which nationality they come from. And that was instituted since the beginning of the pandemic by the Trump administration. Trump also instituted the Remain in Mexico policy, which was the Migrant Protection Protocol. And that basically stated that anybody that was looking for asylum will be sent back to Mexico and then will be attending court hearings at 10 houses that were set out in certain ports of entry between the two countries, namely 4 ports of entry. So these people had to travel and be living in camps and so forth. So the Biden administration got away from the Remain in Mexico policy. Most of the migrants that were living in camps were eventually let in. But the Title 42 was the challenge in the courts. The Biden administration didn't win that case, and therefore Title 42 is back on, and it's still on, and it hasn't never gone away. So a lot of migrants are going back, but here's the scenario. That is not an immigration ruling. It's a CDC ruling. Therefore, whoever is expelled under Title 42 can always come back because, again, he wasn't expelled under an immigration ruling. Okay? So we had a lot of people that they sort of recycle themselves. They keep coming back in, trying to attempt 1 and twice and 3 and 4 times. That's happening. And part of those 2.3 million could be a good amount of people that have sort of recycled themselves, just keep recycling into it. Currently, one of the issues that I see, the ports of entry are not designed to hold people. They have no jail cells. You don't have room for that. And that's the only way you can request asylum. There are exceptional cases, such as in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, and Hidalgo, Texas, south of McAllen, where there is a shelter in Reynosa, and this shelter is called Sendas de Vida, run by a pastor, a good friend of mine, Hector. Pastor Hector has a list, and he keeps a list of all the migrants that come in. He goes and presents them names to the board, to customs, and customs decide, okay, send me 10 today, send me 10 tomorrow, and send me 10, and so they're processed in that way. But it's a really lengthy process, and these people is living in tents for months and months and months until the day comes when you can get on a bus and go to the bridge and present yourself and request asylum. But that's one bridge. Laredo stopped it. Brownsville doesn't do it. And Juarez doesn't do it that way. Juarez, it was doing it, and El Paso, they were doing it out of one bridge. But again, because the ports of entry are not designed to hold people, you cannot allow a lot of people because you're going to overwhelm the port of entry. And so in the Trump administration, that was defined, and that's why you saw the rise of CBP officers wearing riot gear and all this fencing going around and a lot of more security on the ports of entry. If you ever drive now back to Mexico, you're gonna see on the bridges a lot more security, a lot of wiring going all over the place. It's just because they were afraid that a mass people, like we saw in Guatemala and Mexico. Remember when they got onto that bridge and they turned the fences in Mexico, they were afraid of the same, so they decided to put more fencing and wiring. So what is the easier solution? The easier solution would be to get this done through the embassies. Now, is people willing to do it from their home country, knowing that embassies are sometimes also narrow places? It's another funnel. And so there is not a policy that will ease up this process in any way, fashion. And having said what I just said, the backlog on the courts, where you only have 300 plus immigration judges and their docket is loaded all the way to 2027, sometimes 2028. I have friends that live in Tulsa that are waiting in a court, and the next court hearing is 2024 in Dallas. And they're waiting. They're waiting. And so, truth to be told, there is got to be a reform up in Congress that will make this system a lot more practical and adapted to where we are. Kind of like what we do face biometrics and Google, and you can do this. Kind of like when you go through TSA, right? You throw your ID, and they see you, and they know who you are, and immediately the whole information comes on the screen. There's got to be a system, and I'm sure there is a way to get this done. Of course, the home countries will have to play a big role because they will have to verify that the information the person is providing is truthful, which is a big problem for Border Patrol agents because a lot of men claim to be Salvadorans and they are not, they're Nicaraguans, or they claim to be Hondurans and they are from Guatemala. And in northern Mexico, there is a lot of change of documents. And so one of the things, commonly things you find in the border is documents tossed around because people don't want to give their real names, especially. But the one problem is if you have ever been captured for U.S. federal agencies, they run your fingers. And if you give your name, let's say my name is Pablo, so I gave my name Pablo. Well, you will always be known in the federal system data as Pablo, but it turns out that wasn't your real name. You just gave a fake name, and then you want to cheat the system. You come across again and says, "No, this is my real name," but your fingerprints gives it away. You can only do that in the U.S. But in the home countries, they don't do that. There's not an advanced system of that nature. And so agents struggle with this quite frequently because a lot of men and women have come twice or three times and they are given fake names. And so it's hard to gauge whether that person is really who she claims or he claims to be. Yeah.
Coming up on time. So I just want to close off by thanking once again Pedro Rojas for coming to give a talk here at the University of Utah. I want to just reinforce one of his statements that one of our roles in all of this is to educate ourselves about the complexities of immigration to the United States. There's not one cause and there's not one solution, right? And so I think one of the things that we can all do is just educate ourselves about what's going on and what we can do and help inform our legislators about our opinion. I think that's an important role as citizens. So please join me once again in thanking Pedro Rojas for the talk.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you to those in the audience. Yeah, online. Thanks.